Welcome to Splendid Tales, where true power walks in quietly but leaves the world shaken. Today's story starts 30,000 feet in the air, where calm meets chaos and pride meets its mirror. Flight 782 to New York buzzed with chatter, businessmen adjusting ties, tourists arguing about legroom, and a group of flight attendants whispering near the front. Among the boarding passengers was Elias Cole, a tall, well-dressed black man in a charcoal suit so sharp it could cut through ego. His watch alone cost more than some of the passengers' cars, yet his steps were silent, confident, and humble. As Elias reached his first-class seat, a blonde flight attendant stepped forward with a tight smile. "Sir, there's been a mix-up. We'll have to move you to economy." Her tone was polite, too polite, the kind that hides insult behind courtesy. The air shifted. A few passengers smirked. One white man chuckled. Maybe he wandered up here by mistake. Elias didn't flinch. He just adjusted his cufflinks and said, "That's funny. I didn't realize confidence required a boarding pass." The attendant's cheeks reddened. The chuckles stopped. But the humiliation lingered like spilled wine on white fabric. He was told to wait by the side as others took their seats. The whispers grew louder, stereotypes flying faster than the plane ever would. If you're already feeling the tension, hit that like button. It's about to get worse. The plane doors shut with a metallic click that sounded almost like a warning. Elias stood quietly near the galley as passengers settled in, pretending not to notice the pitying glances from a few and the smug grins from others. One man across the aisle whispered to his wife, "They'll let anyone in first class these days." The woman snorted, hiding her laughter behind a glossy magazine. Elias smiled faintly, though the corner of his jaw flexed. "You know," he said softly to the attendant who had demoted him, "mistakes are funny things. Sometimes they fly higher than the planes." She didn't reply, just tightened her jaw and turned away. Minutes later, a balding man in a wrinkled suit, the one who'd taken Elias's seat, snapped his fingers for service like he was calling a dog. "Miss, champagne. And make sure it's cold, unlike the attitude of the man who couldn't afford to sit here." The cabin laughed. Even the co-pilot at the door smirked. Elias simply leaned against the wall, checked his watch, and murmured, "Time's never late for truth." A small turbulence hit, sending the champagne bottle tumbling, splashing directly onto the balding man's lap. The laughter flipped. Now it was at him. The man cursed, the attendant panicked, and Elias just smiled. "Careful," he said. "Karma's got good aim." The passengers shifted, realizing the quiet man might not be who they thought. If you're enjoying this twist, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the storm's just starting. The turbulence passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than any cloud outside. Elias finally took his seat, still in economy, squeezed between a man who smelled like regret and a woman furiously texting her followers about the drama in first class. Every ding of her phone sounded like judgment. Up front, the same balding man, still fuming, kept throwing glances back at Elias. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "People like him think they can buy class." The irony hung in the air like cheap cologne. A few passengers chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join or shrink away. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest joining us today, the keynote speaker for the Global Equity Summit, Mr. Elias Cole, CEO of Cole Dynamics." The plane froze. Mouths dropped. The blonde attendant turned pale as the truth landed harder than the turbulence. The balding man blinked, realizing he'd mocked the man who was literally sponsoring the event he was attending. Elias stood, his tone calm yet sharp enough to cut through hypocrisy. "I was going to fly private," he said, "but I thought I'd take the people's flight to see how the people treat people." His gaze swept the cabin like a quiet storm. "I see we still have work to do." Some passengers applauded softly, embarrassed. The flight attendant whispered an apology, trembling. Elias smiled faintly. "Apology accepted," he said, "but remember, respect isn't a seat upgrade, it's a mindset. If that twist stunned you, like and subscribe. The reckoning isn't over yet." The moment hung in the air like electricity. The cabin crew tried to recover, offering Elias wine and apologies wrapped in nervous smiles. The same passengers who'd whispered now stretched their necks to greet him, their politeness dripping with sudden realization. But Elias wasn't here for their redemption story. He was here for their reflection. He turned to the attendant. "I'm not angry," he said softly, "but I want you to remember something. Prejudice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles and says, 'Sir.'" The words hit harder than any shout. Even the co-pilot lowered his eyes. Then the captain stepped out, his voice shaky. Mr. Cole, on behalf of the airline, I. Elias raised a hand. No need, he interrupted, pulling out his phone. One tap, and his company's logo appeared. This airline, he said evenly, is partly funded by my firm. I don't cancel flights, I replace management. A gasp rippled through the cabin. The racist passenger who'd mocked him earlier sank into his seat, face redder than the spilled champagne. Elias leaned slightly forward. Funny, he murmured, how altitude shows attitude. The crowd broke into stunned applause. By the time they landed, every whisper had turned into admiration and every smirk into shame. The airline issued a public apology before the plane's wheels cooled. Ilias walked off first, not as a passenger, but as a lesson carved into their pride. If this story hit your soul, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because this has been another unforgettable episode from Splendid Tales.